Cyberpunk 2077 had what can only be described as a train wreck of a launch. The game was so buggy that it was often unplayable, meaning no matter how good it was beneath the glitches, it received nothing but bad press. In this video we'll take a look at the game over 7 months later to see whether it's been saved by updates. And this video has been sponsored by High-Tech Computers, where you can buy Cyberpunk 2077 if you're on PC. Link in the description. Cyberpunk is a futuristic open-world story game set in the fictional world of Night City, and behind a smokescreen of glitches, I believe this game does get a lot of things right. One of these is the story, which is really the centerpiece of the game. I would give you a light overview of the story, however there are actually multiple iterations depending on the life path you choose. You can decide between starting out as an outcast, gang member or corporate businessman, and this initial choice really dictates how you feel and play the game, not because it's forced but because it just feels right. This leads on to another strength of the story, which is how in control you feel. In some games the player can feel like they're a passenger to the events in their playthrough, and while this can be executed well, Cyberpunk makes you feel in control to an extent that you feel like you've had a unique experience and you've also done things your way. This is partly a clever illusion, however in quite a few scenarios the places you visit and your choices of dialogue will influence events. The character development is also really well executed. You feel like you get to know the other characters, and this is made engaging and enjoyable through the extensive dialogue choices. This leads on nicely to immersion, which is another thing that was nailed here. Glitches aside, we'll get onto those later, don't worry, Cyberpunk really gets you engrossed within its world. One element of this is the map, which while not perfect, achieves the atmosphere incredibly well. From the neon signs to futuristic buildings and vehicles, the world you play in really aligns with the game's themes very well indeed. There are quieter suburbs, bustling centres, and the inclusion of themed areas such as Japantown adds variety and room for exploration. What I appreciated most, however, was the inclusion of the barren desert areas in the east part of the map. The stark contrast here really changes up the pace and style of the gameplay because a decent few missions are staged out there, which was really nice to see. Talking about gameplay, it's a bit of a mixed bag. In terms of the combat, it's surprisingly simple. You carry 3 main guns and this is how you'll be taking most people out. There is good variety within the weapons though, with the choice of many shotguns, pistols, snipers and assault rifles, allowing you to dispose of enemies with your preferred loadout. Weapon customization is present, however it's not particularly in depth, although many of the weapons are incredibly satisfying to use. There are some unique elements mixed in there too, with hacking abilities making stealth possible, something that a lot of players will appreciate. Melee combat is also present, however its usefulness is rather limited after you get past the tutorial. Your mileage may vary. Combat aside, the actual gameplay is a really nice mix of a full-on RPG and an action-adventure game. It has some of the full-on action that you might expect from GTA or Red Dead, but still reserves strong character-based elements too. One other element of the game which is well worth mentioning are the side missions, but first I want to tell you a bit more about our sponsor High-Tech Computers, where you can get everything from PC games to the PCs themselves. They have a huge range of pre-built PCs, many of them including the latest RTX 30 series graphics cards, but if you want to build your own, they sell parts individually too. They also provide a PC repair service and they do custom built PCs also, and as I mentioned earlier, they have Cyberpunk 2077. So if you're interested in any of this, please check out the link in the description. Now back to the side missions, because Cyberpunk's main story isn't actually that long, taking about 20 to 25 hours to complete. This means that the pace is kept really high the whole way through, which is just another strong point for the story. What this has allowed for though is a really good set of side missions. Pretty much all of the side missions are properly linked into the main story, and they really do add to it too through extra character development, more detailed backstory info and just generally fun missions. This is one of the few games where the side missions are worth fully completing for all players whether you're a completionist or not, which is great to see. Now sadly not all areas of the game feel like they've gotten the same amount of attention as the strong points such as the story and side missions that I've just mentioned. Many said the game was unfinished at launch, mainly due to glitches, however even 7 months later this does seem to show in areas other than just the performance. The police for instance can't drive, but literally because moving police cars do not exist. If you commit a crime, a drone or maybe a few police officers will appear from thin air, and while they will chase you for a bit, if you go around a corner or hop in a car, you will escape very quickly. This is really disappointing, especially if you've played GTA, however the storyline does at least include some really fun car chases with other enemies, but it is a shame that this area is so underbaked. Underbaked can also be used to describe the vehicles. The handling has been improved since launch, however it's still rather lacking as many of the cars feel like they've got very little weight to them. There's also no car customization, which will be a bummer for many, but having said that, the game isn't really car focused, or at least not in its current state. Your car is pretty much a means of transport and not much more. Now on to glitches and performance, which is still a big talking point for Cyberpunk. Sadly, your experience will massively depend on your platform, which is a shame to say at launch, let alone 7 months later. If you're lucky enough to have a next-gen console, then you won't have to worry about crashing or game-breaking glitches. There are still quite a few bugs, however usually these will at most just take you out of the immersion a bit. People walking through walls, that kind of stuff. The game runs at 60 FPS, however does dip in busy locations, which does show that it's still poorly optimised. Nothing unplayable though. As for last gen, then you should proceed with caution. If you have a PS4 Pro or One X, the performance is similar to next gen, just with lower overall frame rates, more noticeable FPS dips and a slightly higher risk of crashing. Performance wise, the game is hardly in an acceptable state, but it's perfectly playable and I'd still say it's worth it. As for the base PS4 and Xbox One, there is still a very long way to go. On PS4, frame rates as low as 15 have been reported, and while this is a worst case scenario, the game is capped at 30 and often runs below 1080p. If you do have one of these consoles and are absolutely dying to play it, then you would manage, but wouldn't have anywhere near as good an experience as you may do in the future. If you can wait, then I'd recommend doing so. Now, if game patches outdate this info, which hopefully they will, then I'll update the video description to give you an overview of performance per console, so do check that out. Overall, Cyberpunk 2077 has come quite a long way since launch. It is still, however, lacking in a large handful of areas, and the state of performance on base consoles is unforgivable. Even with its numerous flaws though, I can't deny that I've had a lot of fun playing this game, because it has a really compelling story and an abundance of fun missions. The characters and the map are great too, and while combat could do with some extra depth, you can see how the good really outweighs the bad. There's still more to come too. In fact, a 40GB update came out recently, which does at least show that the developers do care. I do think they're really working hard to get this game up to scratch. All in all, I believe Cyberpunk 2077 can be strongly recommended to most players, with the exceptions being those on base consoles or old PC hardware. If you're thinking of buying it, then remember that it's available from high-tech computers, link in the description. Anyway, that's all for this video. If you have enjoyed it, then a like or even a sub would be absolutely amazing. But that's everything, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.